Ghosts and Goblins flew straight out of hell and onto your NES back in 1986. Developed by Micronix and published by Capcom, Ghosts and Goblins was yet another in a long line of Capcom NES games that started out as an arcade release, where it quickly drew attention for not only its unique horror medieval aesthetic, but also because of the sheer amount of quarters it could quickly eat if anyone wanted to try to get very far in it at all. The arcade release was mostly exactly what we'd end up with on the NES, with you playing as the now iconic Arthur, as he fights his way through 7 stages filled with tons of the undead and demons standing in his way. The arcade release was definitely one of Capcom's more popular games at the time, and was pretty much a no-brainer to port onto the still brand new NES, hoping to bring the game to an audience that, at the time, couldn't get enough of playing their favorite arcade games right on their home TV sets. But did Ghosts and Goblins bring all of the fun of the arcade in tow, or is this one of those early NES arcade ports that should be laid to rest in the nearest cemetery? Well, suit up with your favorite coat of arms, because we're about to see if Ghosts and Goblins is still worth going to hell and back, and then back again for. Start up the game and you'll get a super brief cutscene where Arthur and Guinevere are on a particularly steamy date in the middle of a cemetery, only to be interrupted by a devil that steals Arthur's woman away. Shocked at the idea that his date in a haunted cemetery probably wasn't the best idea, Arthur quickly puts his armor back on and then it's off to destroy the legion of demons in his way to get Guinevere back. And just like in the arcade, Arthur does this by running left and right, jumping and throwing his weapon at whatever's in front of him, which is mostly a selection of enemies that enjoy either walking back and forth or flying around the screen like some sort of deranged insect. Making your way through each of the game's 7 levels will require a mix of fast reflexes and luck, as every one of them will throw out a variety of platforming sections for you to navigate around, complete with all of those super cool bottomless pits and blind jumps that everyone seems to love. At the end of each stage, you'll fight a boss that's standing in your way, and if you can make it past them, then it's on to the next level as you inch closer and closer to finding Guinevere. Thankfully, you're not left to fend for yourself without some help, as the game does at least give you a decent number of weapons that drop during the game, like fireballs and axes, to help you along your journey. You also get a selection of items that can both aid and hurt you that drop throughout the game, like adding or subtracting to the stage time, extra armor, and those always useful bonus lives. And that's really about it as far as gameplay goes. Ghosts and Goblins certainly isn't trying to be anything more than a basic action platformer. And if you're thinking that all this sounds like a fun little NES game to blast through in an afternoon, well, you may want to make it through the rest of this video before you attempt it. Of course, all of this is fairly standard for just about any NES platformer, and if it ended there, then Ghosts and Goblins would probably be a lot less notorious. Unfortunately, that's not where things end, and as you all probably already know, Ghosts and Goblins is mostly known for its legendary difficulty, a difficulty that starts punishing you almost as soon as you press start, and doesn't ever let up until you either beat the game or kick your NES across the room from sheer frustration. It all stems from a combination of technical issues, awful items and weapons, and an absolutely staggering amount of cheap enemies and patterns that all meld together to form the perfect nightmare of a game. First up in that nightmare are the weapons. As mentioned before, the game does at least have a decent variety of weapons that drop for you to use that, in theory, should even the playing field a bit. Unfortunately, most of those weapon pickups are actually much worse than your default lance, with only the dagger being a worthwhile upgrade. In fact, a good majority of the weapons seem to put you at a severe disadvantage as soon as you pick them up, like the axe that you throw in an arc that's maybe useful once in the entire game, or the fireball, which will continue to burn if it hits the ground, preventing you from throwing out any more attacks until it completely burns away. The dagger actually ends up being by far the best weapon in the game, simply because you can throw it at a much faster rate than the other weapons. So even if you do miss an enemy, it'll generally fly off the screen fast enough that it won't hinder your ability to continue to attack, like how the fireball and other slower weapons do. As a result, this is definitely one of those games where you'll probably be avoiding weapon drops more than actually picking them up, except for when the game just puts one directly in your path, basically forcing you to pick up a weapon that essentially handicaps you until something better hopefully drops. Other items in the game are mostly useless as well, since the ones that can actually help you, like extra armor, drop so rarely that it may as well not even exist. And then there are also a variety of weapons that will actually somehow make the game harder for you, like items that decrease the time you have to finish the stage, or a wizard that appears and turns you into a frog that can only hop around the stage until you're inevitably killed, which is always super fun. And even with all of this, the game could have still been pretty fun, if not for some of the cheapest enemy placement and patterns ever seen in a video game. Every stage is filled to the brim with enemies that either love flying straight at you or cornering you with no escape. And for a game that only allows you to take 2 hits before you die, well, you probably already see how this is gonna go. I'm seriously not lying to you at all when I say that attempting to beat this dragon boss got me so angry that I actually took my socks off in a fit of rage. I have no idea why I took my socks off, but that's just what Ghosts and Goblins does to you. It just makes you insane. And the rest of the game isn't much better, including this section in Stage 2 that has you scaling a building with enemies that take way too many hits to kill and is so impossible that I couldn't stop laughing at one point because I was too angry to scream anymore. And when I finally did get past it, I wasn't even sure how I managed it. This is because progressing in Ghosts and Goblins just, for the most part, feels like you do it by accident, with no real idea of what you did different to reliably make it through that section of the game again because the difficulty can seem so random at times. Maybe there are some people out there that actually enjoy this kind of torture, but for me, it's just not fun to get this mad at a video game. And all of this isn't even mentioning the game's technical issues, with janky scrolling and flickering enemies making everything just that much worse. All of this combined basically sucks out any of the fun that Ghosts and Goblins could have ever provided, unless you're just one of those people that enjoy this type of challenge. At the end of the day, despite its insane difficulty and other issues, Ghosts and Goblins is still one of those games that's remembered fairly fondly, judging by the sheer amount of collections and consoles it continues to get re-released for. Though I genuinely wonder just how much of that is based on sheer nostalgia alone, rather than actually wanting to sit down and play through it these days. I can only offer up my own experience with the game, since I was also one of those kids that absolutely loved Ghosts and Goblins back in the day. And I've got some great memories renting it from the grocery store by where I used to live. Hell, I went into this review expecting to relive a lot of those memories with an awesome game that I fondly remember. Instead, I came away wishing I'd never ruined it all by realizing just how badly this game has aged. It doesn't run well, and the weapons are god-awful, and difficulty is somewhere between mental torture and an actual crime against humanity. So no, I don't recommend revisiting Ghosts and Goblins this Halloween, since the only raging monster the game will provide will be the one it ultimately turns you into.